Quarterback is the toughest position to play in professional sports, and it might be the toughest to evaluate. We're going to take a look at for Buck Index and where Geno Smith stacks up with the rest of the NFL here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our Monday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening up in Anchorage, Alaska, or down in San Jose, California in 49ers land. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are now 3 weeks away from training camp report day, at least for rookies, and we're getting closer to the official start on the 24th of July. So we got a little bit longer, but getting closer to the return of football. We're going to be taking a close look at where Geno Smith stacks up against other high-priced quarterbacks, the veteran QBs in the NFL, with my new Bang for Buck QB Index. Going to take a deep dive into that. And we're going to continue our 90-man countdown, which features a pair of returning veterans as well as a free agent signee that is reuniting with offensive line coach Scott Huff. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Quarterback is widely viewed as the most important position in professional sports. There might be a few other positions that make an argument to try to compete, but quarterback is the most challenging position. You have the football in your hand every single play. You have to manage line calls, et cetera, et cetera. And so with all of those responsibilities, Rob, the amount of money these quarterbacks are being paid, it is really tricky to evaluate the position. And there's always going to be some debate about what statistics are most important. And so I decided this past weekend, you know what? I'm going to create my own quarterback index that's going to be able to evaluate at least veteran players in terms of bang for buck, because so many of these quarterbacks now are making $45, $50, $55 million a year on their new contracts. So it really boils down to which teams are getting the most bang for their buck. Who is providing the most value on the dollar with these contracts? And so I decided to take a deep dive here where Geno Smith compares to 18 other quarterbacks that make at least $20 million per season and had at least 300 passing attempts the last 2 years. And I had a lot of fun doing this with 9 different categories.
Yeah, and it's 9 different categories that basically run the entire gamut of what you are looking for when evaluating quarterbacks. And Corbin, I don't want to steal your thunder. You're the one who did all of this work, and thank you. I'll kind of make a quick joke here before I do kind of steal that thunder. Thank you so much for FanDuel for being a sponsor. I'll make a wager right here on this bang for your buck conversation that we're going to be having, Corbin. Our listeners and viewers, thank you as well. I'll wager that when you leave today's show, you are going to be that much more appreciative of just what a value that Geno Smith is for the Seahawks. When you just look at his contract in comparison to the other 18 veteran quarterbacks that Corbin took the time to parse through these 9 different statistics, anything ranging from big time throws to passing yardage to passing touchdowns to, all these different metrics that are now out there at the quarterback position, it is very clear that Geno Smith is the best bang for your buck among veteran quarterbacks in all of the NFL. He is due $25 million this upcoming season. That is easily the least of the other 18 quarterbacks on there. And again, obviously there's 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL, but this is not taking into account the Brock Purdy's of the world, the quarterbacks that don't yet have those big salaries. But when you look at the veterans, you look at the veteran starters just over the last couple of years, again, as I mentioned, $25 million for Geno Smith. The next on the list in terms of the least amount of salary is Baker Mayfield at a little bit over $33 million. That's a 25% increase. So it's not just that Geno Smith leads in terms of being the most value at the position, again, among veteran quarterbacks. He is doing it by such a significant margin, Corbin, that, I mean, you mentioned about it before we even started the show, that some that you have shared these statistics were already arguing that there must be some type of typo in here, but the logic and the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, this is a case where the data speaks for itself. And look, there is no quarterback assessing metric that is infallible. There's always going to be something that is going to jump out. Well, that could be a little bit better. But I think with all the traditional and advanced statistics we have available to us now, that we can really come up with an all-encompassing system. And so that's why I ended up putting together this bang for buck index where you are adding the score for 9 different metrics and dividing it by the annual salary, multiplying by 100, and that gives you your bang for buck score. Now, let's look at some of the categories here real quick. As far as passing yards, and I based this off the last 2 years, so we had a big sample size, but over the last 2 years, Geno Smith ranks 5th in passing yards. And how I did this, I handed the first player in every one of these categories 100 points, and then I went down 5 points for every spot below them. So in this case, Geno Smith is going to get 195, 90, 85. He gets 80 points on this one. It's 7,906 passing yards. He's going to get 80 points. And so I'm going to be doing that on every single one of these categories. We're going to be giving points out based on the ranking that the player has. If somebody ties, if there's 2 players are the same, then whatever the number is you're on there, they both get that score. And then you would just skip over the next slotted 5 interval to the next position. So this ended up being, in my opinion, a very fairly assessed situation with the passing yards. You've got completion rate as well, where Geno Smith also finished 5th. So he's going to get 80 points there as well. And so when you're looking at those completion rates and how they stack up, that creates a little bit of a situation where we've got the bulk passing yards, we've got the completion rate, we've got completion rate over expectation, which we'll get in the second part of the show today when we're looking more at advanced metrics. But this really is an all-encompassing thing. And of course, touchdowns are going to be incredibly important in this as well.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned touchdowns next, because, again, that's one of the most simple statistics to look at is just passing touchdowns. Obviously, the quarterback with the ball in his hands in every play, he has the opportunity to throw those passing touchdowns. And so to be able to compare players, that's one of the simplest ways that we can make this comparison. And I love, again, that the fact that you did this over multiple years. Obviously, Geno Smith has been Seattle starter the last couple of seasons. So really, if we're going to have an apples-to-apples comparison and a fair comparison, it shouldn't just be a one-year runoff type of a situation. Sam Howell led the NFL in passing yardage a year ago, but over the last couple of years, 2-time Super Bowl champion Patrick Mahomes, 2-time defending Super Bowl champion Patrick Mahomes actually leads in passing yards. So again, I think that sometimes the critic in all of us is going to say, oh, well, Geno might be higher in this or lower in this. That's not really fair. A lot of effort was put into making sure that these statistics are fair, are over multiple years, and just acknowledging the obvious that there are moving parts with every offense, different offensive linemen, different receivers, different play callers, et cetera, et cetera. I love the fact that we have this conversation about the passing touchdowns, because, again, those critics are going to suggest, well, what about rushing touchdowns? I mean, you're taking away some of the things that make Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, so successful. I mean, they led all quarterbacks a year ago in rushing touchdowns with 15 apiece. Geno Smith had 1. Hell, Sam Howell had 5 for Washington. I mean, Geno Smith's got 3 total in 4 years at Seattle. But still, even when you throw in the rushing yardage and rushing touchdowns with Geno Smith's passing yardage and passing touchdowns, his value to the Seahawks remains incredibly high. And so, again, the easy statistics, the ones that don't require much explanation: passing yardage, completion rate, passing touchdowns, interception rate. Geno Smith is among the top 5 in the NFL in virtually all of them.
And I'm glad you pointed out the interception rate, because that's the last segment, the last statistic that I'm going to be looking at here before we move on to some of the advanced metrics and some things that maybe are off the radar that should be among the most important criteria when we are evaluating quarterbacks. And that interception rate, some of the readers that I've talked to in the last 24 hours have said, why aren't we just doing raw interception numbers? And the reason that we're not doing raw interception numbers is because you could have players that threw the ball 600 times in a season. And so I'll give you an example here. Sam Howell last year led the league in interceptions thrown, but he also threw 612 passes. Since he's on his rookie contract, he's not going to be getting this bang for buck metric. But the interception rate, the number of interceptions thrown per 100 passing attempts, that is going to give you a much better picture of how quarterbacks are protecting the football and how they are with their decision-making. So Geno Smith, again, finishes in the top 6 in that category. And I've been saying this for the entire offseason, Rob. I mean, you look at most of these stats, Geno Smith is going to be in that top 5 or 6. And so that was a big part of this. So when we come back, we've looked at some of these traditional statistics. We're going to get to some of those under-the-radar stats and some advanced stats that I believe ultimately set the cream of the crop apart from the rest of the quarterbacks on this list. We'll get to that here in a moment on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the WNBA, and much more, and you can bet on it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 win or lose. Has Caitlin Clark done enough for the Indiana Fever to win WNBA Rookie of the Year? Is Aaron Judge going to continue to hit home runs? He's on pace to get over 62 again this season for the Yankees. And is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. going to stay hot for the Blue Jays and continue hitting round trippers? You can bet on all of it on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We are taking a deep dive into quarterback play in the NFL with my new bang for buck QB index. And for those of you that are just tuning into the show, just as a reminder here how this works, we've got 9 categories: completion percentage, passing yards, touchdowns, interception rate, passer rating, success rate, game-winning drives, completion percentage above expectation, and big-time throws. You add the scores for all of those together, divide by their annual salary, and then multiply by 100, and that gives you your score. And so the goal of this was to see which quarterback provided the best value on the dollar, or the best bang for buck for their team, with so many of these quarterbacks making huge dollars now. So we had 19 qualified quarterbacks with $20+ million per year that had at least 300 passing attempts over the last 2 seasons. We've talked about the traditional stats. A lot of people look at passing yards, say, well, that could be a garbage stat. Absolutely, it can be. Passing touchdowns, some of that can be impacted by the offense here. And if you have a really good run game in the red zone, that can take away passing touchdown opportunities. So to me, it's not an infallible statistic necessarily for quarterback play, though it is certainly an important one. There are some advanced metrics that I think are worth looking at. And Rob, the first one that jumps out to me with all these new analytics-based stats that are out there, completion percentage above expectation. Not only does general accuracy matter, but the quarterbacks that can really thread the needle, the ones that really can create completions with their accuracy, with their arm strength, that to me is one of the most important metrics that has become available in recent years. And so that had to be part of this equation. And for the Seahawks, this has been a big part of Geno Smith's game. Not only has he been accurate, but he has been accurate above expectation, as well as any quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, and on the most difficult throws, that was to me one of the things that really stood out with Michael Penix Jr. a year ago when I was evaluating the University of Washington quarterback. And obviously, Michael Penix is not going to be on this list. He's a rookie; he hasn't played a single snap in the NFL, of course. But I just wanted to kind of make a point about Ryan Grubb's offense and the difficulty of the throws that Penix was asked to make. It's very similar to the difficulty of the passes that Shane Waldron asked Geno Smith to make. There's not a lot of little dump offs and screens and crossing routes in the offense that Geno Smith has been incredibly successful with. And anybody who is watching on YouTube, and thank you as always, can see that Geno Smith ranks number 2 behind only Dak Prescott. I believe, in terms of this particular category. And again, when you look at, actually Kirk Cousins. And so, again, when you look at the types of offenses and the types of plays that Geno Smith was being successful at, his completion percentage over expectation, basically what you were saying is that you are lining up all of these quarterbacks and you're asking to make the exact same type of throw. And who can make that? From an eval perspective, it's similar to every time I go to the Senior Bowl, for example, then they will ask quarterbacks to throw into the net. And you can just see who has the ability to kind of, put it in the bucket, so to speak, from varying degrees of depth in the throw and velocity and things of that nature. And Geno Smith can put it in the bucket as well as anybody in the country, anybody in the NFL, I should say. And so, again, this statistic kind of bears that out.
And I also think from Pro Football Focus's standpoint, and all these different outlets have some of their own advanced metrics, and some of PFF's throwing stuff I don't put as much relevance in. But I think big time throws, which really is an expansion off of the completion percentage above expectation. Big time throws is about threading the needle, but it's prioritized on throws that are downfield that are going to be more difficult to complete. And guess what? Geno Smith ranks number 2 in that category as well. The only player with more is Josh Allen. And if you've watched Josh Allen play, you know that the guy makes a ton of throws downfield, exciting plays. He has the ability to thread the needle, but you have a couple of really strong-armed quarterbacks in Josh Allen and Geno Smith that are at the top of this list. So with my scoring system, Geno Smith gets 95 points for big-time throws. He gets 95 points for completion percentage above expectation. He had 2 different quarterbacks ahead of him that got 100 points there. So, but the fact that Geno Smith is in this upper echelon in both these categories, that tells you that he has not only been a successful passer, but he has been very successful at the most difficult passes for NFL quarterbacks to make.
Yeah, that's what's most exciting about it. Again, kind of going back for one of the categories here in terms of the completion over expected rate in Matt Ryan, just think about the lack of success that the Falcons have had when Matt Ryan was there, and the weapons that they had around him. That was an Arthur Smith's offense that was so run heavy that the types of throws that Matt Ryan was being asked to make were relatively simple in comparison to the ones that Geno Smith was making. And so, again, the big time throws for Pro Football Focus, I've had my criticisms of PFF in the past. To me, this is one of the statistics that I really do think holds off a lot of value when I'm evaluating quarterbacks, whether it be in the NFL or at the college level, hell, in the CFL as well. That is one of the very first categories that I look at. I want to see these quarterbacks. What's your absolute best before I worry about your absolute worst? Yeah. And when it comes to making the most difficult throws, again, Geno Smith's pinpoint accuracy, whether it be throws that require velocity or touch or both, that to me is one of the things that makes Geno Smith truly special.
The other 2 categories that I had in my formula were success rate, which was developed by the Pro Football Reference team, and that deals with having 40% or more of your yardage on a completed pass on first down, 60% or more of your completed yardage, needed yardage on second down, and then getting first downs on third and fourth down. Geno Smith finished 7th out of 19 players there. Not his best, but certainly was still one of the better ones in the upper half of the metric. And then game-winning drives. You want quarterbacks that play at their best in key moments. And Geno Smith gets 100 points on that one because he is tied for the most game-winning drives over the last 2 seasons. He and Kirk Cousins both had 8 of them. So if you're looking for clutch gene, and the fact that Geno Smith last year set a record for the most go-ahead fourth quarter touchdown passes in a single season, he's got that over Kirk Cousins. I think he has been the most clutch quarterback in the NFL. So there's another one that he's going to get 100 points on in this bang for buck QB index. And those are 2 categories that may not necessarily jump out to fans, but I'm sorry, NFL teams want winning quarterbacks. So game-winning drives, that has to be one of the main factors when you're evaluating this position.
Yeah, no question about it. That's where Joe Montana got the nickname Joe Cool, where Matt Ryan got the nickname Matty Ice. I mean, maybe we should start calling Geno Smith Geno Clutch, because in the fourth quarter, he has thrown some of his most beautiful balls and led the Seahawks to victories. And again, this is not just last year, this is the last 2 years. And I think you can make the argument that some of it is because of Pete Carroll's system, and the Seahawks were often very, very close in football games, and they just kind of had that fourth quarter mentality. But you can have all the mentality that you want. If you don't actually put the ball where it needs to be, then it's not going to be successful. And so to me, the idea of the quarterback wins or game-winning drives, as long as you compare that to the big-time throws and the completion over expected rate, and you again are still at the very, very top, then you can make a strong argument that you deserve to be paid at the very, very top. I do love the fact that you mentioned the success rate, though. That was Geno Smith's lowest score in this category, by a fairly significant margin. As you said, he was 7th on that list. Success rate's an interesting one, because if you really go into what Pro Football Reference is talking about there, it's not just about the quarterback. It is about a shuffling offensive line, about the fact that the Seahawks incorporated a couple of rookie receivers, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Jake Bobo, of course, into their offense over the last couple of years. And there were some times where you had a rookie wide receiver that maybe ran the wrong route, or an offensive lineman that just screwed up, or was just facing an all-pro, an all-galaxy type of a player like an Aaron Donald, for example. My point is, success rate is the one thing that everybody wants success, of course. And so you can make an argument that, maybe Geno Smith is not quite as good as the rest of the statistics suggest, just based on the success rate. But I think that that's putting too much, putting your eggs too much into that success rate basket. And that's why I would, again, caution people and to look at the big picture as far as success rate. The big time throws, to me, from what Geno Smith is able to do, the game-winning drives, to me, are much more important than this idea of success rate that I think, frankly, is a little bit misnamed and misleading. And again, doesn't give Geno Smith the credit that perhaps he deserves based on all the other statistics that we just pointed out.
Let's get to what everybody wants to see, and that is the final results of this first bang for buck QB index formula put together. And again, we had 19 quarterbacks that fit the bill that had $20+ million per year contracts. And we looked at all these metrics. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I even added rushing yards and rushing touchdowns into the equation. Geno Smith finished in the top 10 in rushing yards. He did not finish in the top 10 in rushing touchdowns. So some may say, oh, this is going to have an impact on his standing, but he ended up running away with this bang for buck rate, 0.346. The next player behind him, Dak Prescott, is 0.2. So he nearly doubled him up as the most valuable quarterback in terms of the dollar of these players. It's not close. And a lot of it's because if you look at the chart here, you see 100, 95, 95, 80, 90, 80. He was in the top 5 or 6 in nearly every one of these major categories, and he's only making $25 million per year. And look at the players behind him: Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. You're talking 3 of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and they are behind Geno Smith there. And for those that are saying, well, wait till Geno Smith makes $45, $50 million, then he'll plunge down this list. I got news for you. When I plugged $50 million in for Geno Smith for APY, want to know what position he was in? He was still in first place on this bang for buck formula. So that was the biggest surprise for me in this entire thing, putting this formula together.
Well, and to me, one of the real takeaways about this is, I've lived in the greater Seattle area all my life, and we just watched the retirement of the great Tom Brady. And, I often have heard Seahawks fans say things like, why can't the Seahawks find a quarterback who is willing to share a piece of the pie, so to speak, take less money himself to make sure that the team is, as talented as possible, the way that Tom Brady famously did in winning all those Super Bowls. That's the point here, is that Geno Smith is doing precisely that. So again, all those critics of Geno Smith, I hear you. The man has made some mistakes at times, but when you really compare his statistics to everybody else, his salary to everybody else, obviously everybody who's a Seahawks fan wants some Lombardi trophies to go along with this, but the statistics and the salary bear it out. Geno Smith is the best bargain in the NFL at the quarterback position.
He truly is. And again, this is not an infallible formula. There's no such thing as an infallible formula. There's going to be people saying, well, what about Aaron Rodgers? He missed all of last season. He's still at over 300 passing attempts. And I guess this is something I like about this. Durability should be something that is valued. And so if you aren't out there playing Deshaun Watson, you're suspended. Well, this is going to punish you. And so this is it's encompassing all these major categories, and you're finding the best value, and durability's got to be part of that. If you're not on the field, then you're certainly not earning your money. So I think that this is certainly, it's not a perfect metric, but I'm very proud of it. And I think it's something when we start to see some of these other quarterbacks get paid, we can revisit and see where the Brock Purdy's and the Tua Tagovailoa's and all those players fit in, but they're still waiting to get their second contract. So until then, we'll stick with the 19 players that we have on there. When we come back, we're going to shift gears to the 90-man countdown, and we are going to be looking at numbers 46 through 44. That'll be coming up next year on our on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode of Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a little bit more time to write and produce heavy metal music. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. It's Monday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined here by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Moving away from all of the quarterback talk, we got to get back to our 90-man countdown. We've got numbers 46 through 44. And we're going to have a few players on the countdown today, Rob, where there may be some question marks where they're going to fit because of the depth at their respective positions. And we're going to start off with Coby Bryant, who is certainly a good football player. We saw 2 years ago when he forced 4 fumbles as a rookie. The guy has talent. The problem is that he missed all but 3 games last year with a toe injury, and now he's in a new defense. You've got Devin Witherspoon, Reek Woolen, Mike Jackson, Trey Brown. They've basically completely moved him away from the cornerback position. The Seahawks have been playing Bryant at safety exclusively during the offseason program. Could they put him back at corner in camp? Sure, that might happen, but it seems like that his best bet to make this football team, especially with Jarek Reed II being out, still recovering from a torn ACL, his best bet to make this team would be as a safety where he can use his cornerback background to be a bit more of a versatile free and box safety type player.
Yeah, and I think that it fits his skill set better, at least in my opinion. Of course, he was a cornerback primarily at the University of Cincinnati before the Seahawks selected him. But I've always been really impressed by Coby Bryant's instincts, his reliable open field tackling skills. You mentioned the 4 forced fumbles as a rookie.
Yeah.
Even during the OTAs that I was able to attend, I watched him, as the rules suggest, is that the defensive back is supposed to allow the reception. But that doesn't mean that you can't punch at the ball once the ball is caught by the wide receiver. And I saw Coby Bryant doing that as much or more than any other Seahawks defensive back. And he was one of the few players that Devin Witherspoon seemed very happy with the way that Coby Bryant was playing. Devin Witherspoon is one of those guys who's going to be critical of everybody because he's trying to improve them. But he was celebrating Coby Bryant, again, punching at the ball. And just that to me is a better fit. Again, the open field tackling, the just awareness of around you, the communication skills, and then how to react once the reception is actually made. Those to me are things that Coby Bryant does well. He, despite the fact that he's got very intriguing size for corner, he's 6'1", 195 pounds, or on a 4.48 at his pro day. He doesn't play with a guy at elite speed. And so he has been at least a little bit of a liability at cornerback position. And again, to your point, Corbin, Seattle's depth at corner is just so damn good that you got to find a spot for Coby Bryant. I do believe that he can be a successful player in the NFL, perhaps even pushing for starting reps as a safety in the NFL. But there is no doubt about it. He's going to have to continue to make some big plays, force fumbles, interceptions, whatever the case might be. And certainly remain a reliable open field tackler if he's going to make Seattle's roster, just because, again, the secondary of this club is as deep as probably any in all the league.
Going over to the offensive line, one of the big additions made in free agency, the Seahawks signed Nick Harris, and this was after they lost Evan Brown, their starting center from a year ago, to the Cardinals. They signed Nick Harris, who hasn't started very many games in the NFL. He's had his own injury issues with the Cleveland Browns, but at one point he was a multi-time all Pac-12 selection for Washington, playing for Scott Huff, who is now his offensive line coach again. And I'm of the opinion that Olu Oluwatimi is, I'm not going to say he's cemented as the starter, but I think he's got 1 foot already through the door to be the starting center. I don't know that you're going to necessarily see a full-scale competition there. And yet at the same time, Nick Harris knows the expectations for Scott Huff. He understands how Huff coaches. He's going to know all the drills. He's going to understand the offense. Putting all that together, maybe there's a chance that Harris early in camp could make some positive impressions and turn this into a competition. At worst, you got a guy that has started games at center and guard in the NFL, so you got some swing capabilities there. I expect he's going to be on the roster one way or another, most likely as a backup, but that's really good insurance, and it's a veteran that has that experience playing for Scott Huff that can help all these other young players get caught up as they acclimate to this new system.
Yeah, he's basically going to be a coach on the field. And so I think that is very helpful. He's still just 25 years old. He'll turn 26 during this first season here in Seattle. I think that he is very safe. He is very inexpensive. And I would agree. I think the Olu Oluwatimi, this is his job. But at the same time, I also feel like you have a young, fairly proven center. He started at least a game or two, I believe, in Cleveland, played there for 3 years, and just was kind of similar to the situation we just talked about with Coby Bryant. I mean, he just had a stacked depth chart ahead of him. So even though Cleveland used a 5th round selection in him a couple of years back, he found himself on the outside looking in. So I applaud the Seahawks for bringing in this young man because, again, I still believe that he has the ability to compete for a starting job. I do expect it's going to be Oluwatimi who does that, but I think that Nick Harris at worst is going to be your primary backup at the center position. I love his experience. I love the athleticism. I love the, just the understanding of Scott Huff's offense, Ryan Grubb's offense, as you just mentioned. Again, you think about with Mike McDonald, for example, and maybe a smaller center. Nick Harris is pretty generously listed at 6'1", 293. Mike McDonald had an awful lot of success with Tyler Linderbaum among the smaller centers in all of the NFL, who the Baltimore Ravens used a 1st round section, a guy who's 6'2", 305 pounds. So not much difference, 1 inch and 10 pounds. The center position is not much. So again, there I think is some comfort from the head coach with a potentially smaller center if he is as savvy and as quick as Nick Harris and, of course, Tyler Linderbaum are.
And finishing off today's segment of our countdown, speaking of familiarity, Mike Morris only a few years ago at Michigan played for Mike Macdonald, the one lone season that he was the defensive coordinator for the Wolverines before he went back and took the same spot, returning to the Baltimore Ravens. And unfortunately, we did not get to see very much of Mike Morris last year. He played in the season opener, had a couple tackles, but he was dealing with a shoulder issue that he had to have repaired via surgery. He missed the rest of the season. We have gotten to see him out there in OTAs as well as minicamp. He looked really good, in my opinion, and this is a guy that checks off the first box that Mike Macdonald wants in his defense up front. He wants guys that he can move around, and Mike Morris was able to play that 3-tech 4-eye position. He's played big end. He's played in a stand-up outside linebacker role previously. So this is a player that you can move all over the place. He's obviously going to know Mike Macdonald well from playing in his defense at Michigan. There's going to be some things that are different at the NFL level, but still, he's got that carryover, and he's only in his second season. This is a loaded defensive line group, so I don't know that there's going to be a ton of snaps there, but as long as he can stay healthy, I'm still very intrigued by the ceiling for this kid, especially playing in Mike Macdonald's defense where that positional flexibility is going to be even more valuable for him moving forward. I expect that he's going to have a really good chance to carve out a rotational role because he does present some different skills than some of the other players on this defensive line.
And different size. I mean, he's 6'5", 280, and he's just so tall, so broad, so long, that, again, he just has a very different body type and skill set than so many of the rest of Seattle's defensive linemen. So I would 100% agree with you. Quickly, I think that Mike Morris is among the players that the Seahawks and Seahawks fans should have their binoculars on basically throughout this training camp process, because I don't think, even with the ties to Mike Macdonald, I don't think that Mike Morris is guaranteed of anything at this point. He has never been a dominant pass rusher, so he's going to have to improve in that regard. He does play the run very well, but the Seahawks, again, have a lot of guys that can do that. So, again, I think there's going to be an awful lot of attention paid to Mike Morris. I would agree with you. The upside is very, very high. He will absolutely get picked up if the Seahawks decide to move on from him. And, again, I am very intrigued to see what he is able to do, but he has to do well if he is going to be able to justify the Seahawks keeping this spot, considering the other talented, albeit smaller, players at his position the Seahawks already have on the roster.
As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to be kicking off our training camp storyline series. We've got a special guest that will be joining us to dive into what wrinkles we might be seeing with a new offense with Ryan Grubb at the helm as offensive coordinator. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.